Hey everyone, how's it going? Hope you enjoyed your lunch.
Don't fall asleep.
Yes, try not to fall asleep while we're all speaking. That'd be greatly appreciated. So today we're going to be discussing how to drive user acquisition for brands. I'm going to let each one of these gentlemen introduce themselves, starting with David.
David Tam. I own a few different companies, but the one that's probably most relevant for this conversation is RateSpecial Interactive. We're a performance marketing agency for a lot of financial fintech companies.
I'm Matt Kresge. I run marketing for DFO Global. We're a end-to-end e-commerce company, so we're also a performance marketing agency and network. We build our own products. We're an advertiser too. We make some back-end technology, CRM, CMS stuff too. Make it easy to sell globally. Happy to be here.
Moufid Al-Joundi. I work at Curate Mobile. I'm a partner and chief revenue officer there. My company focuses primarily on mobile app distribution, both in-app and mobile web. And we work with quite a lot of different agencies and brands to help them with their user acquisition.
Alex Jakimtschuk, I'm with FMG. I'm in charge of everything that has to do with the supply side, so all our supply channels and so forth, in order to drive the user acquisition. So we're just going to dive right into it. Mouf, I'll start with you.
Thank you for doing that.
All right. What has changed about driving user acquisition in the last year?
So everything. Where we sit today is nothing to do with what it was like last year. I think it's important for people to know, and I'm speaking more specifically about the in-app or app install market primarily. I can't speak about lead gen or desktop. So for us, everything that's really changed has to do, starting off with transparency and fraud. I think there was a comment made in the last panel talking about the good old days. I think that was like 2013, 2014, where you had companies like Apis and all these utility companies out of China come out and drive, 1.4 million installs in a month with no bearing on what that meant from like an ROI standpoint. The days of, let's just get my app ranked in the top 10 of the App Store are over. I think everybody in this room can attest that there are more fraud detection platforms out there than there are mobile attribution tracking platforms or tracking platforms in general. The reason for that is the world has become a little bit more complicated as it relates to the technology involved in generating apps or driving new app installs. But more importantly, brands are holding companies accountable for this, and through that, transparency is required, and a lot of these different requests, such as impression passback in real time, was not existent last year. So, if you're driving traffic through a DSP, everything used to be a walled garden, whereas today you need to pass back impression, click, time of day. User agent data can be passed back in real time for the advertisers to see. And then they're also evaluating post-install or post-install engagement, not only after day 1, but after day 7. And they're measuring daily active users, as none of this really was the case before. It wasn't as prominent. But that was what's changed.
Yeah, there's definitely a lens over everything now, right? So DFO as a company has moved from lead generation to Nutra, and as that, those industries became more polarizing, we've moved into e-commerce. And that's just what it is. There's there's a lens over everything that you're doing, and to be able to keep up with changes as far as platforms are concerned. I mean, we were talking a little bit about it at the table before this conversation, but we fight daily battles with Google and Facebook that accounts are shut down, and for whatever reason, they may not give you a reason, right? So I think that what's changed in the last year and what will change going forward is that there's going to be more of a lens over the things that you can and can't do, and the reactions to them, which may affect your business in a fairly critical way.
Yeah, I took a different stance, I guess, from what Michael just said. Lead gen, financial, obviously, is a very polarizing vertical. A lot of complexities there, a lot of compliance challenges, because you're dealing with such sensitive data, sensitive consumers. So, but that was our niche. We started in finance. We've always been in finance. So we took the approach of actually building around that. So we had to build out a compliance team and study and hire lawyers for GDPR, for all the stuff that we do in Europe and so on. So A lot has changed from a compliance standpoint over the 10, 11, 12 years. It was definitely a lot easier to market lead gen financial back then. Probably not enough regulation, if I'm being honest, back then. But that's one aspect. I think the other aspect is we just had to get a little bit smarter with how we market. A lot of our companies that we represent, they just have learned over time, right? The things that we did back then, email marketing or just doing search for them, is just things that they can do on their own, or they've grown to learn how to do on their own. So as an agency, you have to figure out how you're going to innovate and develop something that's different, something that they haven't figured out yet, and just be better than them. So
Nice. Each one of you guys sort of represents a different vertical. I mean, Mouf, you do a lot with app installs. Matt, you do a lot of e-com. David, you do a lot of lead gens. Why don't you guys sort of describe how you go about getting your users or acquiring new users for your specific vertical?
Go ahead, Mouf.
Yeah. So we've actually had to evolve as a company in terms of our supply. In this space, everything is constantly evolving. As we're talking about, change just happens, and it can happen month to month. So we had to improve our ad stack. We actually acquired a company at the end of 2018, and it was a fully programmatic DSP with over 250 direct partners integrated within the DSP. We've had to really evolve in the sense of taking a look at our first-party data to start creating retargeting platform for advertisers, and now we're also offering full-on suite of performance media buying for Facebook and Google. So, it's how we've kind of battled everything was, one, we've had to force transparency onto all of our supply partnerships. Two, we've had to get a better understanding of what that looks like. And three, we've had to evolve our technology entirely. And we couldn't wait to build our own. We had to basically buy one. And that's how fast-paced moving the app space is. You have to stay relevant. So that technology has helped us really change our trajectory in terms of our capability of providing what's required of our advertisers. But, we're in month 6 of 2019, and I can confidently say by the end of this year, we're going to have to probably make another move in order to maintain a very steady flow of high-quality supply traffic and improve our technology to really meet the needs of some of these advertisers.
Yeah, user acquisition, when you talk about e-commerce, it's customers, right? It's people that buy stuff. And so we do that for brands themselves. I mean, our target audience is somebody who's doing, our target client, right, is doing somebody who's doing $3, $4, $5, $10 million in the US, and the capabilities that DFO can bring to bear is that we've got the banking and the marketing, and we've got it on a global scale, right? So we can help scale that product, the Moose Mops or whatever it is, to add another zero onto that in Europe or in South America or in Asia, right? So we talk about acquiring users, it's acquiring customers, right? And so what does it mean to acquire a customer? I mean, these days, media buying needs to be creative. And that's part of what I do at DFO is help some of the people that we work with, our salespeople in general and our media buyers, be creative and create that kind of performance language and performance content that drives sales, right? And that's sort of the crux of our business, because I mean, you can learn to buy media, you can learn to do it anywhere in the world, but if you're not going to provide somebody with content that's going to create a result and make them take action, you're just sort of spinning your wheels doing that. That's how it works in our world.
I think a byproduct of us staying focused within just finance is we work with a lot of clients that actually are relevant to each other, and that's worked to our advantage. So yeah, I think not even so much any technology, although we probably do bring some technology solutions that are unique, but I think even the bigger aspect of what's made us find success is just focusing on the correlation between advertisers that we work with. So example would be AutoTrader. We do a lot of business with AutoTrader. I used to work there, so I knew them quite well, but the correlation between them and another client of ours like Experian, there's a lot of correlation, right? Someone that's shopping for a car on AutoTrader is also curious about the credit report or credit score because they need to get an auto loan. So just by having the nature of those interrelated partnerships has helped us out a lot as an agency. and allowed us to do certain types of integrations that you wouldn't know about or consider. Just saying, hey, we want to be a search agency. We're going to run search ads for you. And instead say, AutoTrader wants to promote experience ads on their sites, maybe on their Thank You pages or on their exit pages. Experience, would you do the same for them? So a lot of this kind of correlated co-branding between the partnerships. So that's worked, I would say, uniquely well for our company.
Nice. Leading off of that, in regards to sort of transparency and fraud type of thing, how do you guys go about combating that? I mean, it's such a big thing in our industry right now. We're always getting, that's fraud, we need more transparency, et cetera, et cetera. How do you guys go about combating that?
It's an uphill battle, like every single day, right? We, like the affiliate network part of our business, the nature of third-party marketing is that you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're going to have to make a decision on whether to pay somebody or not, or whether to send a cease and desist letter or not, right? So, we have compliance teams that are set up specifically to watch our affiliates and to watch the type of marketing, the type of ads, and the things that they're doing. They work hand in hand with our affiliate teams. They work hand in hand with our media buyers. What I can say is that they have to, on a global scale, they have to be able to get in contact with one another very quickly and figure out what's wrong and why it's wrong and come to a consensus fairly quickly. I think we struggle with some of that. But, it's a battle that we're fighting every day. I don't know what you guys are.
It's a constant battle. I think our approach was very simple because the app space, I can tell you there are companies that are in countries that are unregulated in terms of the technology that's being built. And some of the business models are surrounding those companies or those technology companies is to create an emulator that looks exactly like a person. It's not what you see in the pictures where it's like a person who has a room full of cell phones. And this is so much more technologically advanced. It's all AI now. And when you talk about fraud, transparency is one thing. We've forced transparency. We're doing, on our performance division, we're doing about 7 billion impressions a month. Okay? Great. What does that mean? Absolutely shit. From an advertiser's standpoint, it means nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, great, thanks for sending me more of server stress, and you asked for it, now I'm regretting that you sent it. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, the click-through rate is considered fraud. Well, really, people don't understand that. CR has nothing to do with it. It's all about the bell curve. There's 90% of the installs that I generate come within an industry standard. And then guess what? Who sets that industry standard? So there's no answers, there's only questions, and there's just constant change. So what we've done to kind of combat that is we've worked now with 3 different fraud platforms. Soon to be 4, David. Where's David? He's not here. So soon to be 4, where we're actually doing a split test. Because in my world, where you have the Kochavas and now Branch, which is a nightmare, but when you have these companies, they have their own fraud detection platforms, and they're the absolute worst as well. They don't even know what they're looking at. So we've integrated into a mindset that take a look at not 1, not 2, not 3, and let's see what the common denominators are, and we're finding them. And so we're utilizing our own first-party data, we're collecting our own IP, and we're creating our own blacklists in real time. We had to create these algorithms to help us. Now, what does that mean from a revenue standpoint? It's also cut out half of it, right? And when the advertiser says to you, where's my scale? We say your scale is shrunk, but your quality has gone up, and you can see that this is real-time data. Well, I need more. And you say, well, here's the value of the data, here's the value of the user, pay us a little bit more per install, and they say no, right? So it's a constant cat and mouse play, but with fraud, I think the first thing to do is understand what fraud looks like, why you're seeing it, where it's coming from, and then more importantly, educate the advertiser exactly on what you're seeing, because the advertiser is getting hit up 100 times a day by people who want their business.
Yeah.
Okay, so if 90% of my day, and I've been an advertiser and I was talking to these guys, I used to manage $500,000 a week in spend. the hardest part of my job wasn't spending. The hardest part of my job was telling people, I just don't have time for you right now. So then it's educating the advertiser on this. You have to take the time and provide them with this data. Once that trust is established, I think from a fraud standpoint, if you can prove that it's not fraud, but it's not a perfect solution, I think it helps out immensely, and it buys you time to basically optimize against it.
The education thing is big because I think like 50% of the battle that we have is educating advertisers on the nature of performance, the nature of affiliate marketing, and the fact that because one thing goes wrong, you don't need to pull all your resources out of that, that sometimes this happens and we can deal with it in a way that makes sense. We can deal with it in a way that like, right, that affiliate doesn't run anything else, or that affiliate now knows that that's what to say or what they can't say, right? Education, paramount. I mean, that's, since I've come into this position about 1.5 years ago, I've helped our salespeople and helped our media buyers just sort of help people understand those small, medium businesses, what performance marketing is, right? Because everybody's from a brand marketing world and they don't get it. They count likes and retweets and favorites, and that's not the nature of this industry. The nature of this industry is results. And so education is like paramount in that, and that's also a battle.
Yeah, for lead gen, obviously we collect different type of data than maybe app installs, and for better or for worse, maybe more data in some capacity. Like we collect PII data, for example, right? So first name, last name, phone number, email address, holds us to maybe a different standard and with different requirements, but also gives us different capabilities. So we take an all-encompassing kind of approach to fraud. Obviously, you can utilize Everflow. Some of their features are really great. If there's signups that are occurring within less than 15 seconds, obviously fraud, especially for a long form. So that's great. But above and beyond that, I think there's just certain type of fraud that you can't catch just with technology. And so we've built out call centers for some of our partners that will actually call out on a portion of the data. And through that element of actually calling, talking to the consumer, whether you don't get a hold of anybody, that in itself is a red flag, or whether you get a hold of people that say, I never signed up for this, or I was offered an iPad, iPhone, whatnot. That's where we catch a lot of fraud actually through the human element that we haven't been able to supplement with some sort of technology solution. So yeah, we take an all-encompassing approach to fraud, but I think with our verticals you have to. So.
All right. Leading off of that, so like what kind of information should advertisers be passing back to you in order to be able to, for you as an agency to sort of deliver the best quality user, or like is it events, or what kind of metrics, or what things should be laid out from the get-go in order for you to be able to do your job properly?
So I think Vitaly mentioned earlier, and he was very right, most advertisers are going to be reluctant to share a lot of their backend data with you. Subscription, obviously, you're looking at things like churn, like what's the first bill rate, LTV, refund, chargeback, cancellation rates, all that kind of stuff. A lot of our clients, I think part of it's also just from history, but a lot of our clients, including big players like Aspirion, we've established a relationship with them where they do share a lot of that data with us, and that's helped out a lot. And so as much as you can get that, I know it's difficult, it's not as easy to just say, get that data and you'll be fine, because a lot of them will say no to that. But I think with the right partnerships, especially if you start with them when they're early on, just learning, they know they're not good at this stuff, the sooner you can get your hands on that kind of data is going to help your relationship long term. So that back-end data is very, very valuable, but I know it's really hard to get.
Yeah, it helps when they're new to this. It helps, frankly, when they're new to this space, and they don't know what they don't know. I think often that they think people are cagey about that stuff because you think you're going to replicate it or you're going to steal whatever it is that they've got and do it for yourself. Like, you got to make sure that these people, like, I don't want to run your offer. I don't have the time to run this product, right? We're an agency. We want to help you. And I think some of the promise that we make to brands and to people who have products is that we're your agency. We are, if you can share lookalike data and you can share your cost of goods and you can share all that background data that we need to be really effective for you, that's great. Let's share it at the outset. But if you don't have it, or for whatever reason you don't want to share it, the data that we're generating, that data is yours. I don't want to replicate this subscription service or this T-shirt or this mop or this shoe insole or whatever it is. I want to get paid because we're driving you lots of sales. And to make that very clear and transparent is what we try to do at the outset. And it's starting to pay dividends, right? Okay, these guys, everybody makes money in this scenario. That's sort of the promise that we're making to folks.
Yeah, so we have two different worlds. I live in two different worlds on a daily basis. I live in the agency world, where I can't call my company an agency because if an agency sees us and we're calling ourselves an agency, they will stop working with us. And it's almost happened to us. And on the agency side, we ask for as much information as possible. So my platform has been built out to basically accept as many different post-install events. It looks at patterns of post-install event data. It looks at all of this in real time. But if the agency isn't given this access by their own client in the mobile attribution tracking platform, then it's, we were marketing blind for quite some time. But now, I mean, look, my company's motto is data, creative, performance. That's it. And so we look at all of our data, and we have so much of it now that we can make smarter decisions. And we can launch a campaign with an agency that's only giving us 10% of the viewability of what's happening with a client. And we're making smarter decisions, but I can tell you right now, do I sleep easy at night? No, because I don't know everything. I can't see it all. Mm-hmm. On the other side, when you work directly with clients, our approach is very simple. We are not account managers. We're user acquisition managers. We want to do your job. So when they give us access, which allows us to see DAUs, ROAS, whatever it is that they're looking at, we'll retain a client for over 2 years, and they'll continually spend with us. And we will prove our value outside of Google and Facebook, because we're showing them that there isn't any organic degradation and that we're not stealing installs, even though our CRs might be less than 1%. So as long as you can see all of this, that's great. But we've also taken the approach that if a client wants to work with us, and I think this was brought up in the last panel, where it's kind of like, run with us, and we're not going to share anything with you, and it's on you. Well, I can tell you right now, in today's market, if an advertiser comes to us and says, I will only tell you when an install happens, nothing else, and we'll charge you back accordingly, well, I won't work with them, because I'm not perfect and Google's not perfect. I mean, I've heard that Google search gets flagged sometimes for fraud. So you're just opening up yourself to chargeback. And I think advertisers, in that manner of speaking, have every right to not trust people because they've been burned so many times. It's just we have to move past it. I don't like saying no to revenue, but I need that transparency, and that's what fraud for us right now is turned into. It's like we are just as dependent on the success of your company as you are with us, and we have to marry that.
But do you feel like it's a lot of like those big advertisers, like the Amazons, that have the budget to spend, they're flexing their muscles on this?
Yeah.
And you sort of have no other option, like, listen, I have to follow these rules or I don't get budget.
No, so we do well with Amazon. We've figured everything out based on quite an amount of first-party data, but they're also starting to realize we have to open up some of that data as well. Because in our world, in performance marketing, here's your install or your lead, but my KPI event is day 7 retention or 5% call rate. Or in my world, it's a purchase that's been made or a sign up. Well, if you're providing one event and saying that this is good quality, I can tell you, and maybe I'm naive, I don't believe that everybody's out there to screw somebody. There is this portion of that, but I believe technology, the way it works is, it's very simple. Buy into inventory that tells you A is install and then B what my KPI event looks like. And any system is going to market towards that secondary event. But what happens after that secondary event and that third event and that fourth event? So regardless of whatever it is that's out there, if volume is being driven based on meeting a criteria that is false, then it's going to come back as fraud. And I think what's happening right now is advertisers like the Amazons in the world and everything are starting to realize that, and they're providing these metrics, and I think they're starting to realize that we can scale and not also worry about losing that client as an agency.
Do you guys have any of those challenges more so in the e-com world at all, or no?
A little. I mean, it's it's more about, I'm trying to think of the way that I can set it up in e-com that makes sense. Not really, frankly.
Do you have visibility into credit card transactions in the e-com world, like percentages of potential refunds, or like is it better if someone's purchasing a product with a Visa versus an Amex or anything along the lines of that would change?
100%, right? So especially when you're going into different geos, I mean, obviously in the United States we're, and I'm in Canada, I'm just realizing that again now. In North America, obviously we pay for a lot of stuff with credit cards, but that's not the way it is in Germany or in Mexico or in Brazil, right? That's not the way. They don't ship the same. They don't pay the same way. They don't ship the same way. They don't hold packages and physical goods the same way that North America does. And so there is a huge rate, like adding domestic processing to some of our stuff. And we have a bunch of case studies. You guys should look at the case studies online. But adding domestic processing to some of these global products that we've sold both for ourselves and for clients has brought chargebacks and chargebacks way down, like 30%, and CTRs through the roof, right? Because people in Brazil want to pay in installments, right? They don't have credit. They don't have the ability to pay in, even if it's a $100 purchase or a $70 purchase. They want to pay in installments. And if you don't know that, you can't go into that market. And if you go into that market, you're doomed, right? So yeah, there's definitely insight into, and it's definitely by country basis. I mean, nobody is the same. The way they pay in Vietnam is completely different from the way that they pay in Sao Paulo or London or Hamburg or whatever it is. So yeah, there's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of research you've got to do before you can think about doing something like that.
Very interesting.
Interesting. Cool. Did you want to add anything, David? No?
No, I mean, I think it led with that part of the question is that, yeah, I mean, getting as much insight is fundamental to having a great client-agency relationship. Without it, you're just kind of probably going to churn and burn through a lot of partnerships, which it's hard to say no when someone comes to you with a large budget and says, here's a large budget, but, no, we're not okay with sharing all this backend data with you. As a business, you have to make that call as to whether it's going to be a good, fruitful partnership or not, or if it's going to be worth all the resources you invest into setting up that partnership, only to maybe lose it in a few months. And sometimes it works out fine. Like if you understand that vertical well enough, you understand the client's vertical well enough, you may not even need that backend data because you get it, you get that vertical. But in most cases, if you don't get that data, you're going to struggle and eventually probably lose that client for a lot of reasons that are not even your fault, but they make it out to seem like it's your fault, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. So in regards to like any new companies, let's say they want to start user acquisition, is there things that they would have to have in place before you guys would even consider them an option to work with, whether they be small or big, like certain budgets maybe, certain creatives that they have to have, or whatever it may be before you consider even working with them?
Yeah, we're a little bit more specialized, so we don't work with a lot of clients. It's just been just like, with most companies, there's always some sort of resource constraints, with technical resource constraints, account management, and so on. So, like, I'm sure it's different for other verticals, but for fintech, finance, we don't work with clients that are too small, just because they tend to be as resource intensive as a large client. So, so there are some constraints on that for at least our business or our business.
Are there expectations usually as outsized as a large client too?
Well, they want you to really turn them into the big size client, right? So you end up being their marketing, HR, operations team, and all the above, right? So yeah, expectations are different.
All in one whole solution.
Psychiatrist.
Yeah, right.
That too sometimes.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a threshold, especially in the agency business. There's a threshold. I mean, if they're not already buying media, if they're not willing to, spend in upwards of 75 or 100K a month, we have to really think diligently about whether we're going to take somebody on like that. Obviously, there's different scenarios, and we've had success with somebody who's in its infancy, or a product, or somebody has something that's in its infancy, or they just have a good idea, where we've JV with them and say, listen, if you can commit to spending this much a month, we'll help fund this, we'll help buy it, we'll help test it, we'll help scale it, but, we want to own part of it, right? It's our own little mini Shark Tank thing that we do internally and with clients. So yeah, there's somebody that's got an idea but has no idea how to do it, or no idea how to buy media, or they don't have an account, or they don't have any money to spend. If it's not the world's best idea, it's not going to work. It's not going to work for us anyway.
You know what? This is going to sound horribly desperate, but I don't care. I'll work with anybody as long. All I care about in my world is can they make money, right? So for every dollar you spend, can you measure two that come back? And I think, there are two clients that we are currently working with who are massive, like publicly traded companies who are just getting into this space in Canada. And that's a byproduct of our branded division on the DSP side. And like, what mobile attribution tracker should I use? They're looking to us almost as a consultant to help them with that. And we have canned answers. I'll never say branch ever in my life. Coachava is easy because they integrate via API into everybody, and you can see all that data. So for us, we actually like working with smaller companies, simply for the fact that they don't know what they're doing. They have a strong brand, in some cases a strong brand behind them.
Yeah.
And if you take over their Facebook, their Google UAC, their Snap, and their performance side, everything outside of the big four, then as a business we have the scale to just help them grow as a business and maintain them almost in an exclusive standpoint. Again, not an AOR, but definitely an exclusive. And we've seen that a couple times. And that life, we were talking about this also, that lifetime value of a client is not going to be forever, right? It's until that client says, thanks for your help, we appreciate it, we've made some money with you, pat you on the back and say, we're taking everything internally. So there is always that risk, and that's fine. That's just the nature of the business.
Yeah, it's funny because that's what we were talking about. I mean, I read an article a few weeks ago about AB InBev, the biggest beverage maker in the world. They have an in-house agency. They halved their 50 beer brands that they were doing creative work with under those big agencies and those big umbrellas. And they went from 3 media buyers to like 75. And they're doing it on performance because they are starting to understand that throwing a billboard up and throwing stuff at the Super Bowl and throwing shit against the wall, and it's just not sticking, right? So they're taking over and seeing what kind of ROAS they can get. Like, they need ROI because I don't think that I think they're coming under questions. Marketing and communications and the things at those big places like that are coming under fire because they're not performing. And they had to make changes fairly quickly. And I mean, AB InBev is a gigantic company. And the fact that they're doing it is a sea change, right? Is something that, like, I'm watching closely because there's going to be I think there's going to be a lot of other brands like that. They're going to do something similar.
Yeah, to lead off that, so I mean, you see these companies bringing in a lot of media buyers in-house and so forth. Where do you guys see the user acquisition sort of industry going over the next few years?
It's going to be that. I mean, it's going to be that. It will be that, and it will be the education around what it means to be a performance marketer and to the metrics associated with it and what you can expect from doing this kind of campaign, right? I'm sure AB InBev didn't go into this not understanding what this is. I'm sure they had people from this industry on the ground there making sure that things, like when we get these guys and gals in the door, like, these are the metrics that they have to hit, and if they don't, we have to find people who can, right? I think it's all about, I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but like some of the clients that we have, the caginess is around us taking their jobs, right? And we don't want to, we're not here to do that. That's not what we're doing. But they should feel empowered, like those brands should feel empowered to, and they need to feel empowered if they're going to be successful, to bring some of that stuff under their own umbrella and use like what we have as another arm, as another avenue to drive sales, to drive revenue wherever it is in the world.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you have a conversation with certain brands and you explain to them, look, not only do we handle, you know, performance marketing for you that fall outside of your internal focuses such as Facebook, Snap, or Google, if we were to take over or even given a portion of your Facebook account, we'll buy it for you on a performance basis. Yeah. You have a fixed budget, you have nothing to worry about, and it's not going to eat into your already existing efforts. And the question is, what the hell are you talking about? How is that even possible, right? Because Facebook and Google, they just go out there and they promise, like, you know, I'll give you a team of 100. It doesn't matter. They can't perform on performance. They just care about how much money can I spend. And when they do deliver, they're only delivering into areas that basically need more monetization, right? So like they're looking for suckers for the most part. And I think in our world, agencies are going to be going direct. What we do and what we are doing and how we're positioning ourselves is becoming technologically relevant, which is the reason why we acquired a DSP. We went from a performance-based vehicle only to retargeting to a creative in-house solution for these agencies, and now we're getting more RFPs for our creative than we are for anything else. As long as you remain technologically capable, that'll be great. But again, with all the changes going on with Apple and location-based data and all this other stuff, these companies everyone's going to be scrambling in the next 6 to 12 months for that data. And as long as your technology can provide a solution for that client, I think you'll remain relevant. And at the same time, there's always going to be a new client who has a massive app, but only decides to hire one person to manage, $7 million a month. And that person's always going to be drowning, and they're always going to look to outsource for someone to help consult. So that's been, since I've been in this business, which is a fairly long time, that's been the main play. But I think the biggest shift in our industry, this is me speaking specifically about the app industry, is the gaming clients, they are by far ahead of everybody. The data that they see, how they can predict value of revenue, I think you're going to see a lot of these gaming clients just go direct. I think King.com did that a year and a half ago with Candy Crush. They just killed everybody. You're talking about businesses that were doing 7 figures a month, just the next month shut off. And that was last year. I think this is going to be a continual thing for gaming, and then who knows what's going to happen with the other verticals.
I think it's probably somewhat relevant or specific to maybe the company size or where they're at in their business cycle. But as a small, mid-sized company, I think just out of sheer necessity, lack of resources, you're going to have to lean on agencies, and I don't see that going away unless you raise a lot of capital or grow your business. I think as a larger business, I have to believe that with all the changes, all the concerns around data privacy and whatnot, all the liability, regulation, that as a larger entity, a larger company, you're going to want to bring as much of that in-house, unless there's a realistic, valid way to make an argument as to why that liability could be shared. But in most cases, the liability will fall into the advertiser merchant, right? So as a big entity, big brand, it just makes logical sense that they're going to want more control over the outcome of how that's impacted. And you can only truly control it in-house. And so unless you're really providing them with some value add that it's so valuable to them or that they can't recreate, that is okay for them to take a chance on that liability risk, I think, fortunately, unfortunately, I think a lot of that's going to be moved in-house, especially for the bigger brands. Smaller, mid-sized brands, again, based on just resource constraints, budget constraints, I think they need help, so they'll always leverage agencies.
Nice. Is there any last points you guys would like to share with everyone before we get into the question period?
I think I need to shut up. I'm talking too much.
Yeah, we talk too much.
So I guess we'll leave it to you guys. Do you guys have any questions for these gentlemen up here? None? Yes,
Answered
Winky.
everybody's.
I don't need it.
Sure, no.
So So with a lot of our offers, like obviously a lot of advertisers, they, especially for gaming, they have hard KPIs that come along with it. So when it comes to testing, what do you guys do in terms of, I guess, you know, because basically like we've never ran the campaign before, you don't know your metrics, you only have historical data, so you can only like maybe target like the best placements that you know of. But at the end of the day, like if there's day 1 or day 7, you know, hard KPI retentions or ROAS or something like that, is something you negotiate with the advertisers, or like do you guys just take the rest? Like do you guys?
So I literally just had this conversation last week. So gaming advertisers don't care about anything else other than, you know, you're the 10th person I've tested this month. Here's what I'm going to give you. You figure it out. So how we solved for that is we just started focusing on what we're good at. I've cut out more than half of my supply sources overnight. I had to redevelop technology with our team to basically summarize exactly what our strengths look like from gaming, from lifestyle, from fintech, from whatever verticals that we've decided to focus on. So with gaming, the problem with gaming is if it's casual, is it social, casino, is it iGaming? There's so many different verticals. So we've had to figure out how to micro-target our vertical based on the data that we've seen for over 6 months. And then we know, you know, don't run this app on a Monday at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So we won't launch campaigns on certain days of the week if we're being, if our quality is being held against us. So, that took a long time for us to figure out. And even with that being said, even when you think you're as prepared as possible, it doesn't matter, because if the client is open to testing, then you have a chance. But if you are just basically someone that they're going to be like, you're on my to-do list and I'll see how you go, then you're done regardless, right? And so that's kind of what we figured out. If the advertiser wants to, handcuff us, yeah, exactly. You just smile and take it.
But
and
you can
thing,
negotiate
yeah.
with them, say, listen, I need at least, 7 days at least in
So-
order to hit that KPI.
I agree, and I agree, but however, if an advertiser says to me, I'm going to give you 10 installs a day, okay?
You can't do anything
I would
with that.
rather just say, look, I'm going to eat a $5,000 test.
Yeah.
Let me just figure it out, which we just did with a client, and it worked.
Which
But but guess what? They still, even though we spent $2,500 and they figured out that, okay, this is great quality, keep it going, don't stop. I still want you to run the 5,000, and then we'll start working with you guys. So look, brands and agencies hold all the cards, and you know what? So they should. They have a lot of accountability on their hands to deliver. So I think to answer your question, we've optimized our entire platform. We look at the data, and we walk away from business if we have to.
So what if it's kind of like a brand new vertical you haven't ran before?
Yeah.
Then do you just offer like a test just to see how it goes, like a free test? Or
Is that when you implement? Let me spend
Yeah.
the $5,000 myself type of thing.
So here's the scenario for new verticals that we don't have any data on. It'll always fail. Like, we know lifestyle strong. We know we know what's good. And I've told my sales team, just because it's a top 20 offer doesn't mean that it's going to be top 10 in our books. We need to focus on what our strengths are. Otherwise, what happens is you burn that advertiser, and then they go tell 5 other advertisers that your traffic doesn't work and not to trust you. And unfortunately, and I'm not trying to speak poorly to anybody in this room who manages budgets as an advertiser, but that is the name of the game, especially in gaming, right? So.
This is kind of a two-part question, but I want to ask you guys about fraud. So for any one of you on the panel, by your own professional or expertise in terms of fraud, like, what is your definition of fraud? That's the first part of the question.
Go ahead, guys.
When in e-commerce, right, when it's advertising or something that's malicious that says it does something that it doesn't, right? Just because I have this bottle here and there's not any lions around here. So I can't say that this bottle keeps away lions just because there's no lions around. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
Right? Like, you can't do that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
Again, in e-commerce, it's fairly black and white like that.
Sure.
You know, as long as stuff is, you know, you're not saying things that are miracle cures or things like that, those days are gone. That's what we see every day and, you know, and deal with.
I think ours is a more broader definition of fraud. Obviously, there's fraud that are like, you know, bot traffic where no actual human even signed up for the products, but somehow it got tracked to sale. Obviously, fraud. The kind of more broader fraud is just where you're misleading or misadvertising the consumer. Yeah. A good example of that, this happened many, many years ago and still happens to a degree within, like, let's say the credit space. Some publishers will create like fake job postings and say, you're guaranteed this job, it's going to pay you $100,000 a year. First step, you got to check your credit report. The job does not exist, right? And so even though the consumer did sign up for it, they fill out the form accurately and correctly, that puts a lot of liability risk onto us and the advertisers. So we consider that fraud as well. And again, that's how we catch things through the call center. So fraud for us is a little bit more broad, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, so my company, we have two divisions. We have performance and brand. And the performance team uses the word fraud like they're breathing air every single day, right? Because everybody doesn't know how to define fraud. And I think fraud is defined as whatever the advertiser says it is. But ultimately, you know, is the low CR fraud, you know, or is, click to install times, to be quite honest with you. I just look at the bell curve. And if 20% comes in before 5 minutes and 80% comes out elsewhere, you know, there's click attribution fraud to be questioned there. I think there are fraud tools in place that basically look at if you're passing back data correctly, third-party fraud tools are connected with other DMPs to cross-reference whether or not that actual app placement or app ID exists within that SSP. So that, you know, if there's a miscommunication there, well, you know what? If the data doesn't align, then it's fraud. It's unfortunately someone's manipulating the flow. And so, you know, in one case, if an e-com company says, you know, 90% of people installed, registered, ran 3 searches for a product, and then 50% of them bought the same product, is it fraud, or were the creatives that were being used promoting a certain product, right? So you just have to really dive deep into that data.
Thank you. And the second question, or the second part of my question, and you just kind of went into the area that I wanted to ask about. So, you know, typically when we think about fraud, we look at the supply side, but we never really look at the advertiser. And so for our particular platform, you know, we do have controls in place. Our technology is all proprietary. We don't outsource to a fraud detection company. I feel like we should at some point consider that, and I've brought that up with my team. But with that being said, you know, within our terms and conditions, we do have a no chargeback policy, but then we also have an investigative team. We call it our discrepancy team. And so those guys will go in and look at what we call suspicious activity, but we'll ask the advertiser to provide some reporting, basically their transaction IDs or click keys or, you know, whatever data we can get. And what we found is that usually some advertisers who claim fraud aren't claiming fraud because of, you know, malicious activity or things that are happening. Sometimes it's just been that they just don't want to pay the invoices, and we'll do the investigation and they'll come back and you know, the investigation will determine that nothing fraudulent happened at the user level or at the partner level. But, you know, the client will then say, well, you know what, I just didn't like the quality. So there's a huge distinction between fraud and just me not being happy with the product. But have you seen instances of that in your experience, and how do you handle that?
We just talked about that exact scenario.
Yeah.
If you've generated a profit with a client, with an advertiser, they should pay you. But unfortunately, there are what's called discounts. So if they've overpaid you for the traffic and they're not making margin, I mean, it's a two-way street. Everyone's trying to balance the numbers, right? And so unfortunately, if an advertiser is playing that game with you, they're just not a client you should be working with, because it doesn't matter what you do. At the end of the month, whatever number you think you're going to get paid on, you're not going to get paid. And I can honestly say in my space, like where we are, we don't deal with that. Like, that's a broad statement. We don't deal with it as often. It's not a bad thing. It's just like, look, how much of this traffic am I going to make money back? And like, are you going to make me look like a complete jerk in front of my boss because I've just lost money? You know, so it's one of those scenarios. It's just you need to know what you're looking at. Yeah.
They wouldn't be a client for very long. I mean, that's basically how it how it shakes down, right? I mean, we work on a CPA basis where it's very evident if we're not driving sales for your product, right? So there's not a whole lot. There's not a scenario in which that would happen a lot. But again, if it were, or there are like too many chargebacks or whatever, you know, I can see 100 different scenarios in which they could purport that, well, they bought it, but then they charged it back, or then their credit card, you know, failed, or whatever kind of payment processing failed. That's a different conversation you have to have. But yeah, like Mouf said, you gotta. That's something you should probably feel out from the outset and make sure that if you feel like that's going to happen, it may not be best to get in bed with them in the first place anyway.
We haven't run into that issue too much, but same exact answer. If we do, we don't work with those type of partners. So.
I think we got one more over here.
So, guys, we're closing the session for after this gentleman puts down his last question.
So there was a lot of talk between sharing data between the advertiser and those running traffic, and as an advertiser, couldn't agree more. So what would you like to see, or what would those running traffic like to be getting back data-wise? What are some of the most important data points that you'd like to receive?
I mean, for us, all that measurable stuff, all of the click-through rates, the AOVs, your cost of goods, and again, this is e-commerce, but your cost of goods, your click-through rates, what you're spending, what you're getting out of it, where, you know, anything that a pixel can capture, like all of that good data is what we want to see. If you've got lookalike audiences, yes, we want those too. All that stuff helps, right? It can't hurt when you're trying to do the same type of work for somebody and not necessarily replicate, because you don't want to target the same consumers, but target those consumers in a different geo or target them in a different way. Marketing angles, like the creative that they've used, right? So a lot of the brands that we work with are brand focused. They're brand marketers and not performance marketers. So seeing what kind of videos and copy and text that they're using that works, you know, we can create complementary funnels and complementary videos and complementary text that goes along with that doesn't that can stay on brand and within your guidelines, but isn't that, right? So even it goes as far as that to see like what specifically, like what works for you as far as videos go, or as far as images go, or that sort of thing, right? Anything that can back that up.
And so it's more to do with before launching, what else has worked, not necessarily the feedback of, hey, here's the feedback from what you just sent us.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's how it is for e-commerce.
Yeah, for us, the two sides of the coin are, on the advertiser side is, look, whatever is most important to you, so whatever access you have, meaning if I'm seeing install, app open, registration, day one purchase, day seven, whatever it is, we create those post-install events into our platform and measure each one accordingly. So if event 3 fired before event 1, it's fraud, and we cut that source off. On the flip side, so it's very simple for us. As long as we can see that data, our system will take care of the rest. It's just going to take some time to ramp up. What we send back to our supply sources are error codes, so everything in real time from click time to install, and anything that basically tells them that this source, wherever they're accessing, there's a discrepancy, shut it off, and then they shut it off for them. So we send them like CTR, creative performance, click time to install, everything along the lines of that. So it's a marriage of the two technologies, but the more the merrier. What it does is it allows us to make smarter decisions.
Yeah.
It depends on the product for us, but let's just take a simple trial subscription product. TCR, trial cancellation rate, is probably pretty important metric that a lot of people want to see or understand early on, because that's an early indicator of quality. And so we make a lot of adjustments just based on that. Whether we pass that data back to the publisher, we just make the adjustments on our side. For example, we create a lot of pricing buckets for advertisers proactively. So we have different buckets for high quality, mid-tier, low tier, and based on TCRs, we'll move them around accordingly, even without telling the publisher sometimes. That's been a very important metric for us, at least, for subscription products, that is.
And these are price buckets?
Pricing buckets, yeah.
And are those varying payments depending on those buckets, or?
Varying payments to the publishers or traffic providers, correct.
Very cool.
All right, thank you very much. Why don't we give these guys a round of applause?
Good job, guys.